Thanks for listening. If you'd like to schedule a one-on-one coaching with Dr. Lodhi, please visit drsadaf.com. I am an American board certified OBGYN, a mom, a Muslim, and I'm talking about sex. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast. Welcome to the Muslim Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sadaf Lodhi, and this episode is everything you need to know about positive intelligence coaching. Before I get into it, I just want to make very clear that I am not giving any type of religious or medical advice. So if you have any concerns about your health, please speak with your friendly neighborhood health provider. And if you have any questions about your religion, please speak with your neighborhood religious leader. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast because I just happen to be a Muslim woman that speaks about sex. So before we get into the podcast episode, I would just like to ask for whoever is listening to please leave me a review of my podcast. I would love it, and I would love to see those 5 stars. So if you could, please leave me a review of the podcast, especially if you enjoy listening to the podcast. And also remember that I always offer one-on-one coaching for intimacy and relationships. So make sure you reach out to drsadaf.com. And now we'll get into the episode. Today, I am super excited to have on with me Dr. Heather Awad. So welcome, Dr. Awad. And if you could please introduce yourself to the viewers and the listeners, that'd be great.
Thanks for having me today. So I'm Dr. Heather Awad. I'm a family doctor in Minnesota, which is, if people don't know where it is, it's in the very middle of the United States, the very farthest north spot in the United States. So that's where I am. I'm a family doctor, but also a certified life and weight loss coach. So I help professional women over age 50 achieve permanent weight loss, and that is my work now. But you and I have been doing some training with Shirzad Shameen and learning some really cool things to help our clients.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for those listeners that and viewers that may not know, there is a type of coaching that's called positive intelligence. It was formulated by a man. His name is Shirzad Shameen, and he is based out of California. I think he actually teaches some classes through the Stanford Business School, and I think also from the Yale Business School, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, so tell me, Heather, what do you like about it? And if you could just kind of go briefly into the type of coaching that he does talk about and what his main premise is.
Sure. So my general gist of what his main premise is that we have kind of these negative parts that are in our lives. And the big one that we'll talk about today is the voice of the judge. But we have even other negative voices in our heads that are maybe have, more specific personalities. But we also have this really wise sage within ourselves. And even those parts have their own personalities, but we can really try to minimize the negative voices in our heads and try to grow and cultivate the sage parts of ourselves, kind of our better essence. So it's a beautiful format to use with our clients.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think it's very appropriate, and especially appropriate for coaching, right? Because I think a lot of times in coaching, we deal with the cognitive aspect of it. So we'll talk about like the thoughts that go through our head, and we know that as coaches, that it's really the thoughts that create our feelings and our emotions, and then those emotions will lead to our actions. And so if we can change the thoughts that are starting up in our head, even before they lead to emotions and then to our actions, then we can really change the narrative of our relationships with really anyone, right? It can be with our partners or our children or at work, really anywhere.
Right. So we help our clients kind of look at their own thoughts, and we show them kind of where they're getting this kind of wiser self that's coming and where they're getting this judgmental voice for themselves and for their partners. And so that can be really eye-opening for them as well.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I noticed that, and I think that we were going to get into it, but we were talking about the judge and something else that he speaks about in his book and also in his way of coaching. The way he talks about it are things that he calls the saboteurs, right? And so maybe
Right.
you could expand on that a little bit.
Sure. The saboteurs, he says the judge is the main saboteur. That's the mean voice in our head. But there are other things that he gets pretty detailed about in his book that are about other ways that we kind of get in our own way. Do we people please? Do we avoid difficult situations? Are we super hyper achievers? And if we're not achieving something, then we're no good. And there are others as well. Maybe we don't need to go through all of them, but there are
And
a lot of different ways that we get in our own way.
yeah, absolutely. Right. He also talks about like the controller. And like you said, there's so many other ones. But I think the important thing to note is when those voices start talking to us in our head, right? So even though we know those thoughts are coming from ourselves, there's a part of us that can be really mean, right? To
Right.
ourselves and of course to others. But really, I think it starts with just being mean to ourselves and then just knowing that, if we're not achieving, then we're really no good, or other thoughts that go through our head, like um like always judging ourselves and our circumstance, like maybe either we're not enough, or that we're not doing enough, or that we're not as good as somebody else. And also I think a lot of times recently people have been talking about like the imposter syndrome, right? And I think that plays into it as well. The judge comes in and starts, you may be talking about something and that judge starts coming into your head and saying, well, you don't really know enough about this topic. Should you really be talking about this topic? What are you doing? This and that. And so I think that those thoughts that come into our head really limit us and really prevent us from achieving our true potential.
I agree. And the thing that's interesting when I work with my clients is they'll say, that mean voice, that's just me. That's just me. And I think one of the things that I love about Shirzad Shamin's work is he points out that that mean voice is not you. It's a thought loop from your childhood that comes back. It's really repetitious. It's always mean in some form, and and it's something that can be shrunk and disrupted, and is not your beautiful inner self.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, something else that he talks about through his coaching is visualizing anytime you have a thought or that may be negative and you're talking to somebody else, whether it's your partner or your colleague or your child or something, is to envision them as their 5-year-old self, right? Which I think is very powerful because you wouldn't, at least hopefully not on purpose, knowingly hurt somebody that was, much younger than you and much more innocent and naive, and and intentionally try to hurt them, right? And
Right.
so when you're in a difficult situation, seeing somebody else as being very innocent and not really wanting the worst for you, I think it makes a big difference. And I think there's so many applications to this, right? I think this would help people with anxiety, people with depression and things like that, because you wouldn't automatically assume the worst of somebody. Instead, you would, kind of pull back a little bit and envision them as somebody who is just, caring and small and loving, and really
Right.
not the negative things that come up.
I think it's a nice one too, since you work with people with relationships. Um, that it's a nice one when you're feeling particularly annoyed by your partner, and you're
And who hasn't felt that way?
right, right, and you're ready to kind of dig in and go for it. And then if you picture them as a small child, it stirs up that warmth in your heart again, right? For them that is probably there already, but it gives you that empathy for them, that maybe keeps you from diving into a big fight that may or may not, have been what you wanted to do.
Right, right. And I agree with you. And I think that that is really a key thing that I'm gaining from learning this type of coaching is how it applies to relationships and really to yourself as well, right? Because we know that in order to have a really fulfilling relationship with others, we have to have a really loving and caring and nurturing relationship with ourselves, right?
Right.
It all starts from our self and our being and how we feel about ourselves. Because if we constantly have negative thoughts about ourselves, then that is only going to spill over into our relationships.
Right.
But if we love and nurture ourselves, then hopefully we can also then pass that on to the person, whoever it is that we're dealing with.
Yeah. I know a woman who's dealt a lot with not having empathy for herself, and she has posted a picture of herself as a small child. And when she starts to get really down on herself, she looks at that picture and she says, you know, I don't want to say that to that precious little girl. I don't want to talk like that to that precious little girl. And because we all hold that little child in ourselves, right? That is playful
Right.
and loving or thoughtful or creative, or, everyone can think of, three wonderful things about themselves as a small child, and that those attributes are still with us. So we should, you know, hold that caring for ourselves in that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that that is one of the ways to foster a really positive relationship with ourselves. And then hopefully we can bring it out onto our other relationships, like with our partner and with our children and things like that.
Mhm.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about what he talks about with the sage.
Yeah. So he'll he has people look at a picture of themselves as a small child, and think about what those attributes are. What was great about me when I look at that picture? And sometimes it's hard because you look at um, a picture of yourself as a little child and you think, oh, I look scared, or I look, um, you know, you can see the bad things that maybe happened to you as a child. But he said, look deeper, and what are the beautiful things? You know, um, you and I and others shared our child pictures, and just you can see like the energy or the thoughtfulness or the playfulness, or um, it brought up a lot of really beautiful things about ourselves as a group. Um, and so he says to take that and then think, this is your natural sage essence. This is your wiser self. Keep cultivating that. Keep trying to remember what that is, and keep trying to use that in your adult life. If you were playful then, are you playful now? Were you creative and you love to make up stories? Is there something that you do in your adult life that you can bring that to now? Because sometimes we have forgotten those things, and
Yeah.
it's good to bring them back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, something else that he talks a little bit about is this yes and maybe you can talk to us a little bit about what that is.
Sure, sure. So he likes to talk about that sometimes we think we are right and the other person is wrong. And that can be in a room full of people, in a group we're in, at work, at home. And he said, we all need to remember that the other person who we think is totally wrong is at least 10% right. And can you agree with that? And it's really hard to argue against that. Even when I think about people that are really difficult, I think, he's right. They're at least 10% right. So his yes and um, kind of I don't know what to call it, exercise that you can do in your own head is think, okay, well, what's the 10% that's right? That sounded wrong what they said, but what do I like about it? So I can say, what I like about what you said is this. And so maybe I didn't tell them they had a great idea. I didn't tell them they were the smartest person I ever met, but I can tell them that little piece of their idea that I liked. And then I can say, and then I can kind of go off of it and bring my perspective to it. Um, and sometimes it'll even, spur a new idea in me or in you to come up with something else that adds to the conversation. but it doesn't shut down that communication between the two people. Then you're engaging, it makes you on the same team, you're collaborating. So it's kind of a cool idea.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic because, definitely, as we both know, working with people on a regular basis, you definitely don't want to create a negative atmosphere. And so by always at least acknowledging 10% of, whatever their suggestion is or idea is, then at least, they know that you've listened to them and that you
Right.
are actually paying attention to what they're saying, and that, even if it's a really bad idea, you didn't just shut it down and say, wow, that's like the worst thing I've ever heard in my life, Instead, you've at least acknowledged it and said, yeah, maybe, and then we can also do this. And so that, right, just like what you said, it's more of a collaborative effort and not really like a confrontational or a negative one, or where somebody feels really shut down by the way that, we've responded to their suggestions. So I think that that really helps in fostering better relationships, both at home and at work.
I love what you said there too about listening too, because so many times when you don't agree with someone, like you're in your brain, you're racing ahead to what you're going to say next, right? And we see people do that to us, and we know they're not really listening. But if you're looking for the thing that's right and what they said, you really are. And that means a lot to people to be heard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it helps so much in relationships, right? And specifically, what I'm thinking about is like when you are in a relationship with, well, with your significant other,
Hmm.
right? And oftentimes when we get annoyed with them, which I'm sure never happens, right? But when we get annoyed or for frustrated, then we are definitely not listening. And, we are constantly, at least I am, I can't speak for anyone else, but, like sometimes I can be short, right? And to
Yeah.
maybe not really give them the space that they need, or, even let them speak their full sentence, right? So
Yeah.
I think by listening and saying that yes, and actually even saying it back to them, right? Tells them that you've listen to them. And I think with coaching, that's a big part, right, in terms of us going back and reflecting on what the patient or the client has said to us, and it really emphasizes just how important listening is. And it does make a big difference, and especially when we talk about relationships and we're talking about intimacy and creating that emotional intimacy, which is typically what most people want. And especially when it comes to women tend to really want that emotional intimacy with their partner.
Yeah.
And I think one great way to develop that is to really hone in on the listening skills for everyone, so
Hmm.
that you can create that emotional intimacy.
Yeah. I love that. Um, and it even makes me think, what you said about listening to your partner, about how there are times when our partner will give an opinion about um, something that we think is like our territory, right? Like they'll be like, one of my kids will be sick. I'm a family doctor, and my husband wants to make a suggestion about something about the sickness, and I'm thinking, stay in your lane, buddy. That's just a voice in my head. I've got this all worked out, and but if I actually listen, then I can hear the caring of my husband for our child, and there might be something in there that's going to be helpful. If I figure there's 10% in there, then and so then even through the problem, he and I will have connected. And I'm just thinking that I want to do that now, Dr. Sato. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, of course, it's funny because I've, had the pleasure of meeting your husband on Zoom. So I'm just envisioning him saying something and you like thinking in your head, like stay in your lane. So it's just kind of like, yeah, no, absolutely. Right. I
Yeah.
mean, it's the same thing. My husband's an engineer by trade, but he works in finance. And so, it's same thing. Like anytime he says something medical, I have to like stop
Right.
myself from like saying, oh God, okay. And the poor guy, he actually doesn't even say anything then. He's just like, all right, well, I'll just let you handle it.
Yeah.
doing.
And maybe
But
that's
yeah,
not what
absolutely
we're hoping for either in the intimacy, that they totally back off
right,
and are like, "Oh, no, not me. This is all you." Either, maybe that's
right.
yeah.
Right. And so that's where the communication shuts down, right? Is
Yes.
if we are constantly judging our partners or our spouse or our colleagues or whatever, then that communication just stops. And
Right.
so then there's just no collegial environment there, or when it comes to a relationship, that intimacy can't grow because you're not sharing your experiences, you're not being emotionally connected. And definitely you need the emotional connection, because you can have that physical intimacy,
Mhm.
but then it doesn't probably mean as much unless you have that emotional connection, and for
Right.
some people they don't need that emotional connection, but for others they do. And so, and oftentimes the emotional connection, the emotional intimacy will lead to that physical intimacy, right? And so I think
Right.
that if we're, for people that are trying to work on their relationships, it all starts with communication. And actually that's one of the biggest factors in surveys that they've done for female. It's called the Female Sexual Satisfaction Survey.
Uh-huh.
And they say the biggest factor in identifying whether or not women are satisfied in their relationships is communication. So there we go.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. That makes sense. It really makes sense. Yeah.
Right. So, I'm just curious when you think about this emotional intelligence, and not so much emotional, but the positive intelligence,
Mhm.
where do you think people could use it? I mean, I know that you and I think that we could use it all the time, but are there any specific areas in somebody's life that you think it might really be helpful in?
I use it in my weight loss program. But really, I
Oh,
think,
yes.
yeah, I think that decreasing the voice of the judge is a great way to start, and is usually, it's one of those things where there are many things that you can use out of this, but that's like a big step in the right direction that really helps people, I think. Would you mind if I shared
Yeah.
with you how I use this with my clients? Because I think your
Oh, that would be
listeners
fantastic. I
could
love
try
it.
it.
I would
Yeah,
love it.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love it.
So what I do is I say, try to find that thought that is the thought of the judge offers you. And this helps because then you realize that it's a thought loop, because it's usually repetitious. So it's either like you go to the mirror, like when I was 16 years old, if I went to the mirror, I always said, "Oh, my nose is so terrible," you know. And so it was always that. It was never like, "Oh, my ears or my chin." I mean, it was always like the nose was the thing that just kept offering me that. Um, or maybe when I made a mistake, it was always like, "That was stupid. I can't believe you did that." And it was always that same thing over and over again. So we practice these thought loops, but they can be disrupted. So what I have people do is come up with 5 things that they like about themselves. It doesn't have to be about anything particular. It can be like, you can think, "Well, I have great hair," or "I'm really good at my job," or "Cats like me," or "I'm really good at reading stories with the voices with my kids." Anything, really anything. Write down 5 things. And then I have them put them on sticky notes and put it on their mirror, any mirror that they go to often, because frequently, if you have a strong judge voice, it definitely comes when you come look in the mirror. So, what I have them do is when they go to the mirror, to first look at one of those sticky notes and read it to themselves. And so, instead of, if I did this at 16, instead of going there and saying, "Oh, your nose looks terrible," I'd go in there and I'd look at a sticky note that says, "You are great at math," or "You are a good friend," or whatever. And so practicing disrupting that, can really help shrink that voice of the judge. The judge doesn't ever really go away, but you can really practice disrupting that. And then my clients will say, "Well, after a while, I had to move around the notes, or I put them on a different mirror. I had them in the bathroom, and then I moved them to the one that I look at before I leave the house," or, because we get used to seeing things and then we don't notice them anymore. But I'll tell you, some of them said, "I always thought that mean voice was me. And now that I know it's something I can just disrupt, and to intentionally look and say some really nice things to myself that are true, it's really helped them feel better about their lives.
I love that. I love that. And it's so empowering, right? And I think
Yeah.
that one of the greatest things, honestly, that I've learned through coaching is that we are able to change our thoughts, right? I think
Yes.
sometimes we feel that like our thoughts are like waves and we're just riding them and
Hmm.
we just have no control and they just come and we just accept them and that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But to realize that you can actually change your thoughts, and if
Right.
I can change my thoughts, then I can change the way I feel. And just what you said, right? Changing those thoughts by putting those words up on the mirror and seeing those every day, changes the way I feel about myself.
Yeah.
And so if I feel differently about myself, if I love myself, if I think that I'm really a caring person that loves others and wants the best for others, then that's just going to change the way that I act.
Right. Right.
Right, and it's gonna be a different story that I tell myself as opposed to, like, a negative thought that I may be telling myself that, "Oh, I'm so, judgmental, I'm so jealous,
Yeah.
I'm so this, I'm so that." Instead, it's all these positive affirmations, and I don't know if you remember on, at least when I was growing up, and I think it's maybe the same time that you were growing up, we always had that Saturday Night Live, you had that Stuart Smalley, and he would
Yes. Yes.
talk about like I'm good enough, I'm
Right.
strong enough, and gosh darn it, people like me.
Yes.
And the funny thing is at that time, growing up, I was like, what the heck is he talking about?
Right.
That's so
Right.
funny. But like now when you think about it, you're like, whoa, he was on to something. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's right.
Definitely.
I
Definitely. And it's good to
yeah, so
think things that seem true to us, right? Like I might want to write, you are a great marathon runner, but I cannot run 26 miles. But I could say, I'm a runner, if I was, or something like that, if I'm trying to become more of something, I could say something that seems true, that heads me in the right direction. If you put something, obviously if you put like, I am the nicest person in the world, that's not going to feel true to me, but I can say that I'm a good friend and that does feel true to me. So you want something that seems true because otherwise your brain will be like, no.
yeah, right. And that judge is gonna be on steroids then, right?
Right.
So you're like, what the heck? That's not true.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely, right? You want to encourage those positive affirmations
Yeah.
such that it changes that negative loop that you have and those thoughts that you have about yourself. And so now you're thinking positive thoughts about yourself.
Right.
And imagine like all of the good that can come out of that in your relationship with your spouse, your partner, whoever, and also at work. So that you show up,
Yes.
you know, like a positive person so that people actually gravitate toward you and not
Mhm.
away from you if you were say like a negative person or a judgmental one or something like
Right.
that.
I think that Shirzad Chameen makes a good point too, that we judge ourselves and we throw that judgment out into the world. And mostly it's both ways. So when we actually are nicer to ourselves, we will most likely be nicer to other people, like you said, at work and in our family and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, if there would be some, like, say, key takeaways from this positive intelligence that you've learned and garnered, and what you teach your clients, what would you say that those were?
I would say that, I mean, the big one is that mean voice in your head is not you. And you can shrink it. And you can,
Right.
there's good research that we can change those thought loops. And so it's worth trying it, to shrink that mean voice in your head. It is not you. You are that really neat little kid. That is still you. Um,
Yeah.
the other thing is I would say to, think about having empathy for yourself. Picture that small child inside yourself, and picture it in the people I'd say is, it's hard sometimes to picture this, but it does work for some people to picture them as a small child. I have had people say, it's really hard at work for me to to do that, but try it out, experiment, see if there's someone that's bothering you at work, or if you're just feeling a lot in conflict with your partner this week, picture them as they might have been as a little child, as a 5-year-old, and kind of notice their own cute attributes.
Right, right. And I think that those are great takeaways. And I think that it's not that hard to incorporate, right? But
Right.
it takes practice. It takes practice,
Right.
just like with anything else, and I like where Shirzad says that, these positive thoughts are is actually like a muscle in your brain that you have to
Mhm.
keep exercising so that it grows stronger, so that those positive thoughts are the ones that are coming to you as opposed to your negative thoughts, which kind of is the default for, I think, really everyone. And so to grow that muscle in our brain, we have to continually practice it. So I think that that's really important as well.
Right.
But um
And one
well,
other thing I
that
would
was
say too is that when you have a really stressful day or a stressful week, the judge will get really loud again. And that's normal. So then you can, just like you said, practice that muscle again and be kind to yourself and think those thoughts on purpose that you've chosen, and know that it will shrink down again. But it's normal that sometimes the judge will get real loud again too. You aren't doing it wrong.
right. And I think, kind of what you're saying is that you really can't do this wrong,
Yeah.
right? Like you just have to practice. And I think also is when you allow yourself to think differently, you'll achieve different results. And I
Hmm.
think that's one of the key things to remember. And that, I think another thought that sometimes people have is that, they're failing. And that because they're not able to have these thoughts or to practice them, that forget it, it's not going to work, it's no good. What do you say to that person?
I say that our lives are journeys, and we're not failing. We're experimenting, and it's kind of funny, but it's like the when the toddler falls down. You watch a toddler going across the room and they fall down. No one says that kid is terrible at walking. They failed.
That's right. That's right. Might as well just forget it now.
Right, right. Why are we letting that kid walk?
That's
It's
right.
it's we're not that different. We mess up, we do things wrong, we fall down, in the things that we're trying, and so we should have some grace for ourselves. None of it's a failure. It's really just sometimes a bump in the road, and we can keep going and try something else, or just keep trying the same thing again if it worked before but just isn't working today. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. So that's definitely one of the key takeaways, everyone. You haven't failed. There's always tomorrow, and you just need to practice. I think that's the biggest thing. And also that to, improve your relationship with others, your spouse, your colleagues, your kids, really starts with improving the relationship with yourself and loving yourself and being more compassionate and understanding with yourself. And then that will then spill over onto your other relationships.
Right, right.
So, Heather, how can the people that are listening and watching get in touch with you if they're interested in, say, losing weight and they're over 50? How can they reach out to you?
Sure. I have a download on how professional women over age 50 lose weight. It kind of gives you the special things that are needed for people who are over 50. And that's at my website, vibrant-md.com/50. And that's something they can find there. I am also on social media. You can come find me there. But
Yeah. Do you want to tell us what your handles are?
I think I'm trying to remember. On Instagram, I'm Heather Awad MD. You can find me on LinkedIn as well with my name. Those are probably the easiest.
Okay, awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being on. And well, we are done here, and it's been real and really intimate. So remember, this is not meant to be any type of medical advice. So if you have any questions about your health, please speak with your friendly neighborhood health provider. And until next time, this is the Muslim Sex Podcast. Please be so kind to leave a review for the Muslim Sex Podcast. 5 stars are always welcome. And I would greatly appreciate it. And until next time, this is the Muslim Sex Podcast.